Good morning, Internet. Welcome to Tuesday. That is, if you start the week on Monday, that would be one day, and then Tuesday would be Tuesday. Get it? All right. Anyway, welcome to this morning. At least it's morning here in France, where we are recording this month. The topic that we wanted to cover. Let me just check. Oh yeah. In the last video, I cut off part of my head, not literally, but just in the video. And so I'm going to try to be a little more aware of that, at least in this video. So the topic we wanted to discuss today was a sort of a riff or a progeny, sort of think of it as like a future generation or an ancestor of a thought that we've talked about earlier. And that is just the idea of sort of perfection and expectations when LTC, learning to code, and more specifically, just the idea of sort of trying to develop a habit of taking a step back, at least for me, and like really thinking through things of first principles, or which is a phrase that I'm actually not sure what it means, so I don't know why I'm trying to use first principles here. I'll leave that to Peter Thiel and other people, sort of maybe understand the world more broadly or differently and more specifically than I do. But what I mean by first principles, or what I was sort of leading towards, is the idea of stepping away and trying to be aware of when you're getting attached to the fact that there is a great way to do something, a fabulous way to do something, a perfect way to do something, an elegant way to do something. And instead, just stepping back, pausing, and doing two things. So the first thing is sort of writing pseudocode or writing quasi-code. So the pseudocode is like when you write things, the different steps, out in your own words, sometimes in English or sometimes in French or whatever language you want to use in order to sort of think through logical steps of your code or program or problem that you're trying to solve. Just taking a step back and not actually writing real code, but sort of like half code, half native language, which in my case is often English or sometimes French, now that I'm studying programming in Paris. So the first thing is pseudocode, and just like having the discipline to, before I like jump into a problem that I'm trying to solve, or a website or a web app that I'm trying to build, just like take a few breaths and then start writing out in pseudocode the plan or the different steps and how I understand the problem. The second thing is perhaps to me equally, if not more interesting. It's just sort of trying to adopt the idea of doing things as basic or as like barbarically as possible. At least when you're first doing problem sets or first learning to code LTC, I think it's like really helpful to try to do things in a very simple way before trying to use what might be like a higher order function or an elegant syntax or something. Like what I try to do is I try to remember, like for JavaScript, if I can do this with a for loop, like maybe I don't have to do some higher order function. Like there's this function in JavaScript called the reduce function, where basically you take one of the uses of the reduce function is you like take all of the elements in an array. So say like all the numbers in an array. Say you have an array of 1 to 3. If you wanted to use the reduce function, you would add up the values of 1, 2, and 3. So you just take your array, you would do upon reduce, and then you'd like use a specific reduce syntax to sort of add those all up, and I think it should be 6. But in any case, like you can also do that in a variety of more simple ways. And sometimes I get really flustered around how to use the more elegant way, like the reduce function, instead of using just like a for loop or a counter or different things that would also sort of have the same effect and get you to the right answer, but just not be as cool or not be as industry standard. And I think sometimes this for me comes from a place of like I'm often insecure, and when it comes to like learning to code, LTC, and just like the idea of being a programmer, sometimes there are these doubts that come up. And so, like, in order to cope with that, I want to use the best way immediately. And because I don't remember the best way or don't know the best way to do something immediately, sometimes I'll just like end up doing nothing, or just like thinking and becoming really frustrated, rather than starting with what I know, like a for loop and a counter, solving the problem. Like, often when you solve the problem, you feel good about solving the problem, and then you can go back and you can do what's called refactoring your code. So you can go and like tweak your code and make it more elegant, make it sort of closer to the industry standard or whatever. So in any case, and anyway, I just wanted to take a few minutes in this video, and we wanted to talk about the idea of sort of perfection, and two simple steps that you can potentially use when LTC learning to code, particularly in the early stages of LTC, and sort of how to combat perhaps that tendency that we might all have of wanting to be like really, really great at the get-go. The two things that we discussed were the idea of like taking a step back and writing things out in pseudocode, which is essentially like half code, half English, or half code, half Spanish, or half whatever, but it's essentially not real code. If you run it, it won't run and give you the answer. And then the second sort of concept was the idea of just like going back to the basics, back to like the fundamentals, back to the potentially any way that you know how to do it. If that way is simple, that's probably better rather than worse. And you just start from there and sort of work your way up. And then eventually, if you solve the problem, then you can start to think about the more elegant, potentially higher order function or whatever to solve a basic problem or whatever. And you can go back and you can refactor your code, which sort of allows you to feel great about having more elegant code, but it also might help you avoid getting stuck on the first part of the problem. So those are just some simple thoughts. I don't know if they're simple, complex, whatever, but those are just a few thoughts we had that we've been sort of thinking about this morning. And we would love to know what you think. As per tradition, comments, lame and thick. Tell us what you really think. You can be nice, you can be mean. But if you're mean, we might take the simple average rather than the weighted average. Sorry, bad math joke. But just be yourself, and be safe, and we'll see you again soon. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you again soon. Cheers.